Hey, it's Pastor Pete. It's the 5th commentary video that I'm attempting. I am learning as I go. This one should be fairly compact. I'm learning to not try and use everything that's interesting, but what is most interesting. I'm going to set this one up. I'm going to try a new pattern here by giving you the refined nugget clip. That kind of is the essence of what this video is going to get to. That way you can decide at this point whether you want to hear how we build to that or how I build to that, using Sinek's conversation with Carey Nieuwhof. Found it all very interesting, but I've selected just a few. Here's the nugget of nugget clips.
And so I think the church can learn for that, which is the opportunity is to spread the gospel. Nobody said that it has to be done one way. Nobody said it has to be done in one location, at one time, at one, that suits you.
So that's a taste of where we're going to end up. The first clip I'm going to share with you is simply kind of introductory at the beginning of their conversation, and we'll take it from there.
It's interesting. It's a theory, could be a bad theory, but one of my theories is sometimes if you live in the US but you weren't born there, you have a slightly different perspective. Any thoughts on that? Do you think that your experience abroad has given you a more unique vantage point, even though it was for the first decade?
Well, I think you're making a case for diversity. I think you're making a case for diversity and the value of diversity, which is we all grow up differently. We see the world through different lenses because of our childhoods and our upbringings. And depending on where we come from or how we experience the world or how we go through the world, to bring that new and alternative perspective to a team is what makes teams great. If we only bring in people who look the same, sound the same, the same color, the same, go through the list. If everybody's, the same, then what you're going to get is people who have the same perspective because they grew up like you. So to answer your question, did my upbringing living around the world shape my worldview that's different than the people who just grew up in one place in the United States? Yes, of course. And that's not unique to me. That's unique to anybody who grew up differently than the people that they work with.
So
in the first regular clip that I just showed you, Carey asks about the effect of having lived outside of the U.S., of his interpretation or understanding or experience of it. And that's a subject that's dear to me. And if you watch the last video I put out, Douglas Murray says something very similar. You need to travel. You need to broaden your experience in order to actually understand better the experience that you live in. That's true of my life. I've lived many different places. The last time I did a count, which was around 2006, it's more than that since then, but I had lived in around 23 homes or places, specific homes in specific places for 6 months or more in my lifetime. So moving was a big part of my life, and it's shaped my interest in sociology and group dynamics, because every time as a child you entered a new environment, even if it was still the same language environment, there was a particular culture of a particular place that you had to quickly learn to pick up on. And that makes you, if you start to pay attention to that, I assume you could kind of blunder into it as well, but I would pay attention to that, and that makes me now an observer of cultural patterns. So I notice things out of having developed that practice. And then on top of that, we made one move to Europe and then back to Canada again. And that created a whole new level of this, which puts me very close to the category of what academics call a third culture kid. Preachers' kids, missionary kids, army kids tend to have this, where they've moved a lot and they've lived in a culture outside of the one they were born into, and they never feel truly at home in the culture that they were born in when they return to it. And so they actually kind of have a third culture. They may look like they fit, but they have a different perspective. And so I had it many times where I've had incidences where the local people thought a certain thing was common sense. For instance, I remember one small town we lived in that was only 20 minutes from a major grocery store, but some of the people in the area still had the habit of planning for a month the trip to the grocery store. And that just seemed really odd. But also living in Europe, where the distance to everything is very short, then living in Alberta, where a half hour to an hour drive to get somewhere is not unusual. So on and on these patterns go. And Simon Sinek says this is really supporting the idea of diversity. So I would combine that with and say you need to be equipped with diverse experiences, and maybe you need to be guided in them, but you need to be exposed to them through books or travel and that will create diversity, and you need to learn out of that to welcome diversity, not just want to cling to the people within your own bubble. And that's when breakthrough things can happen in the teams that are made that have diversity. So there is a good start. They're just kind of this is at the beginning of the whole video. Again, I'll put the source video link in the notes. They're getting acquainted. Now I'll move to the next clip.
One of the major influences on your life is a theologian, I guess also a philosopher, professor of religion, James Carse. So talk about the impact of his work. And you also struck up a personal friendship with him. I'm sorry for the loss of your friend a few months ago as well, last year.
Thank you. Yeah, he died in September of last year. So I was given a copy of one of Dr. Carse's books called Finite and Infinite Games. It was written in the mid-1980s. I was given it probably when was I given it? In the early 2000s, sometime mid-2000s. I mean, I've known about his work for a while. And it challenged my worldview. Very simply, Dr. Carse said that there are two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Football, baseball. There's always a beginning, middle, and an end. And if there's a winner, then necessarily there has to be a loser. And then there are infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means new players can join at any time. The rules are changeable, which means everyone can play however they want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game. To stay in the game as long as possible, but really to perpetuate the game. Turns out we're players in infinite games every day of our lives, right? No one wins education. You can come in first for the finite amount of time you're at school with the agreed upon grade system and rank system, but nobody wins education. No one's declared the winner of careers. No one's ever declared the winner of business or the winner of global politics or the winner of life. Nobody wins life. Right. It doesn't happen. Right. But if you listen to the language of so many people, it becomes abundantly clear that they don't know the game they're in. They talk about being number one, being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based upon what agreed upon metrics, timeframes, or objectives. And this is a problem because when we don't know the game that we're in, and if we're in an infinite game, if we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, if we play to win or be the best in a game that has no finish line, then some very predictable things happen, amongst which include the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. And so those conclusions, that discovery that so many of us were playing with the wrong mindset for the game we're in, was sparked by Dr. Carse's original definition of those two games. So truly very influential, remarkable human being.
Well, this gave me another filter for my own worldview, another measure of evaluation of what I or other people are doing. And it just immediately poured into my mind all kinds of places where it is relevant. That question of know which game you're in. I think you can even just talk about a short game or a long game. And but I thought immediately of several things in the church currently, like as the pandemic, we just finished the third wave. We're in June 2021 here now. And the masking issue has been a big issue in the church, and also vaccination, to vaccinate or not. And I think there's examples there of people approaching the masking or not masking issue as if it's a finite game that needs to be won now. And when they are doing that, and really anytime we bring a personal agenda to the work of the church, we could be doing something like that, because our personal agenda is likely to have a shorter time frame on it than the infinite game that the church is there to play, or to participate in, I should say, not play, on God's behalf. And we forget that. So it's just so significant that there are many issues where it might be good for a church to learn to ask itself the question in the discussion, wait a minute, are we talking about the short game here, the finite game? And are we playing this that way? Or are we thinking of the infinite game and our role in that? And in the infinite game, there might be issues that become very small when you're thinking about the infinite game. And in this day and age, maybe it's always been that way, but it seems to be more accentuated that we play every issue that we see as if it's a finite game that we need to win in order for the church to be right or correct or proper. So this is a wonderful reframing tool. It had a similar effect on me as when I first learned about polarities, which I still don't, managing polarities, which I still don't really like or understand fully, but it does make sense. I'll move to the next one now. He says a little bit more about this. Okay, I have to jump back in and say the next clip is not on the same topic, but now they're going to talk about existential flex. And that's something new again. It's what I'm used to using, the language of adaptive change. But Simon Sinek has a lot of this similar categories to that, what I've learned before, but he just uses terminology that is new and in some ways fresh then. Also, I will put a link to the Wikipedia page for this doctor that was just mentioned into the notes as well, just so that you can read up on his theories.
Talk about the importance of existential flexibility as we move into the future. Because I see a lot of faith leaders moving back to the way it was, clinging to what they know, going, okay, let's get everyone back in the building. And if I was running a restaurant, a gym, it would be tempting to say, hey, we're just going to go back to the way it was before. Let's get up to 2019 levels, and then we'll go from there. What is existential flexibility? What does it say to us?
So existential flexibility is the capacity to make a 180-degree strategic shift in order to better advance your cause. I call it a capacity because you need two things. There's two prerequisites before you can even make an existential flex. One is you have to have a just cause. In other words, you can't change routes if you don't know where you're going.
Right. Okay? Fair enough.
But then you're just going to always choose the fastest road, but you may not get anywhere. And the other thing is you have to have trusting teams, because if you're going to make a profound shift in the way the organization functions or what its strategy is, the metrics are probably going to go down in the short term, and you're probably going to increase the level of stress as the organization changes. And so you need people who go, I understand what the cause is. I see why we're doing this. And I'm a part of this. And the team is willing to go through the shared hardship in order to do the right thing for the good of the future. If you don't have the just cause and you don't have the trusting teams, no amount of vision from leadership will that existential flex will probably fail.
Well, that brings up a favorite topic to think about and talk about for me as a specialized transitional pastor who sees and is an agent of or a stirrer of much change in church, or sees a need for that, but just tries to create the opportunities for people to recognize it themselves. This is huge. It's a decade old or so now in terms of organizational leadership stuff. Adaptive change is what I call it. And so there are some great books like Canoeing the Mountains that illustrate that capacity. I first learned it from Heifetz, I think his last name is, And it was a profound shift for me. When I present it from a biblical basis, I also call it heart change. But here he's talking about the capacity for an organization or an institution to pivot, to change directions because they've recognized that something's not working. And to do that, any organization needs to overcome this huge inertia, this huge desire, and so I'll talk about churches specifically. It is just so natural for almost, I would say 99% of us to want to go to what is comfortable. P.R. Burton wrote the book, The Comfortable Pew. To want to stay with what's comfortable. And now, as Simon Sinek was talking about, many organizations outside of churches even, they want to now return to what was normal before. And we kind of long for that. And I kind of worry that we're going to find that lacking now. It's not going to be quite the same, and that will create a restlessness that hopefully could become some positive changes. This whole concept was pointed to in the earlier video I did, where I took some clips from Rick Warren and Tim Keller, who both say some changes need to happen in the culture of the church. Rick Warren seems to be very good at this kind of pivot, because he raises the question, they had their year with the greatest number of new converts ever, and they never had a worship service. So he poses then that pivotal question, that adaptive question, like, why are we spending so much energy then on the worship event if that's not producing the fruit that we're actually here to produce? Great. I love that particular clip. So an organization needs to be able to pivot. Right now, most churches are so focused on returning or finding the new normal, returning to the old normal or finding the new normal, that they're not thinking that this is a wonderful opportunity to completely change and reflect on who we are as a church, and then maybe make some pivots, make some changes in that. So very good point that he brings up here.
There's a lot of things that reveal, and I think unfortunately you're right. I think the church as an industry, if we can be so base about it, but the church as an industry, unfortunately, looks a lot like a lot of other old-fashioned industries. So why is it that Apple Computers, a computer company, disrupted the music industry by inventing, by perfecting the iPod? You know,
right.
iTunes is really the thing that changed it, right? So why didn't the music industry invent that? How is it that Netflix, a little startup that came out of nowhere, dominates television and movies? Mm-hmm. Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. They're gone. Why didn't the television and movie industry invent Netflix? But they're now copying Netflix and playing catch up. You know, the disruption comes from organizations usually outside of your purview, right. And you see it all over the place. Which and I think the church as an industry looks a lot like the music industry, the film industry, the music, the television industries, which is, this is the way we've always done it. This is how we got big. This is how we got successful. This is how we spread our message. This is how we know. This is what I know how to do, because this is what I've been doing for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And so either I'm afraid to change because I only know how to do this, or this made me successful, and yet I cannot accept what got me here won't get me there. And I also am, the world around me is changing. Technology is changing. Politics are changing. Culture is changing. And I can't do what I used to do. Like Sears can't keep sending out catalogs. It's not the world we live in anymore. They were the most innovative company in the world when that was a thing.
Loving it. But it's a tough challenge he's putting out here, and I'm applying it to the church now. Are we even ready to admit that we're afraid of making change, of pivoting, of reconsidering who we are and what our purpose is here? Because really, like, even some of the more progressive or contemporary, as we call them, churches and the worship events that they offer still have a lot of the old tradition in them. They're not really that different than like, there's this expectation that people come participate in an event, and somehow in that they have their spiritual batteries charged, even though probably too big of a percentage of them are just there to experience a great event that's somewhat inspirational. But it's really about connecting people with God and God connecting with people, and not just at that event. The event, to me, actually more and more becomes the celebration of the journey of the rest of life. But we've forgotten so many of those things. And as Carey points out, that it never used to be that way. They didn't have these buildings, and they didn't have these big-time worship events. And so we might be in an opportunity to reconsider some of that. I'm involved with some people in rethinking that. For me, it started when I ran a Jordan Peterson meetup for a while, and I began to encounter people from outside of the church who were able to talk about their curiosity and their hunger, but did not consider the church to go to as a place to have that certain kind of hunger met. So that's a call out to the church to wake up. And that's what I'm finding as a theme in some of these videos that I'm making, is these high profile individuals who are in their own way calling out the church to pay attention to who it's supposed to be. Earlier in the video, these two talked about the what, the how, and the why, and how the why, knowing why something is happening, the purpose of it, the meaning that creates the what and the how, is actually glue. It's actually the key motivator. And how in churches we tend to devolve into our boards and even we tend to devolve into only looking at the what and the how, and we completely forget the why. I just read through a profile of a church and the writings about what pastor they're looking for, and that struck me even before watching this video, that there was nothing in all of that about the why, the greater purpose of what the church was all about and what having a pastor there would be all about. And it was disappointing. So huge this flexibility and being ready to make those flexes. But he talks about those two things that are needed: a reason to make the change. So let's just say for the church, we would start to recognize that, you know what, holding a once a week worship event is, does anybody know of anybody being converted in one single worship event? I have never heard of such a story, certainly not in North America. And so we should be asking, what is that? Why does a psychology prof sell out lecture halls talking about the Bible when churches nearby are sitting free to participate in, and yet nobody's coming? What is that? That kind of question drives me, and partly drives me to create these videos. What is that? How are we being like these companies that he points to? Well, this is the way we've always done it, and those people just have to smarten up, and when when their life gets bad enough, they'll come to us for sure, and then we'll accept them graciously without judgment. Oh yeah. No, there's a change going on in the culture, multitude of changes, and we do well to pay attention.
And so I think the church can learn for that, which is the opportunity is to spread the gospel. Nobody said that it has to be done one way. Nobody said it has to be done in one location at one time, at one, that suits you. And the people who like to schedule their entire day about going to this one location at this one time. Who said?
Yeah.
Where is that written that it has to be done that way?
Well, in the early church, it wasn't. It's just been that way for a few centuries.
There you go. You see, we got used to it. And now we think it's the way it's always been. And so for the church to adapt and be able to offer that way, yes, there's nothing wrong with that. There's still people who want that. And what if people want to engage? What if people want to worship on their own time frame, in their own location, or a remote location? Or I want to move from one city to another city, but I want to keep going to the same church with the same people, with the same community. How come you don't allow me to do that? And the church's opportunity is they've forgotten the responsibility of a church is not to get people in the pews. The responsibility of the church is to spread the gospel. So take advantage of changing cultures and changing politics and changing technologies and find new ways. That's existential flex.
So that's the gold nugget clip in its fullness. I gave you a snippet of it at the very beginning. And the more I watch this, the more excited I get, and my smile gets bigger. Some of this I've felt in myself for a long time, didn't know how to articulate it, and it's a joy to see it articulated from many different angles. And I mentioned before, and I think I'll give a shout out here to my colleague Paul Vanderklay, who has he would even say, so it's not a slight on him, sort of by accident stumbled into this other way. We loosely call it an estuary approach, but he started doing YouTube commentary videos on Jordan Peterson's stuff and tapped into, through YouTube, a huge following now that wants to explore these issues of meaning and spirituality. And many of them are the very people that would not have stepped across the threshold of the threshold of a church to explore those things. And now he's been given the opportunity to create a space where people can explore and navigate these things. And I celebrate that. And I think the movement towards more estuary types of places, I won't lay it all out here, is a call. It's a call on some of us to try something different. It's not even a new church plant that does things really differently. It's a new way of relating to the world around us and just exploring things with people, as Simon Sinek implies in this video. So I think that's the end. If there's another clip, I'll add it on the end yet. But thank you for making it this far, if you made it this far. And if you have feedback for me, I welcome it, because I need to learn what's getting across, what's connecting, and what isn't. And I had one piece of feedback already from a young pastor who said, "This is great what you're doing, because I don't have the time to search all these videos out, and you're kind of giving me an opportunity to catch the gist of something in a shorter form than watching the whole thing," which started me thinking about calling this Viewer's Digest. Pastor Pete's Viewer's Digest, because I'm always looking for creative ideas and names. Anyway, till next video, I hope you all stay well and curious about this world.